afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you NieR Automata, the End of YoRHa edition for the Nintendo Switch. Before we begin, I'd like to apologize for the washing machine in the background. Hopefully my voice and the music in the background will help drown it out. And second, I'd like to thank Matthew Rakowski, one of my YouTube followers and one of my patrons, for sending me a copy of this game. Wow. I didn't know I was that influential of a creator. Going into this review, I definitely had a lot of expectations for making sure I did this exactly right, as I've heard from quite a few people that NieR Automata is one of the greatest games ever made, and a lot of people, well, I shouldn't say a lot, it felt like a lot of people were saying, Paul, you gotta review this game because it's so good and I want to hear your thoughts. Gee, that's great. If I end up hating the game, then I'm gonna be in the wild minority. Well, I'm willing to take that risk, because as much as a review is supposed to give you a mostly objective outline of what you're expecting from the game, the reviewer also has to give his or her own opinions as well. So let's start out with the positive, shall we? NieR Automata has, for the most part, really good controls. You control an agent named 2B who is a lot like Bayonetta. She would probably be represented by Bayonetta if she were in a spirit battle in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. You switch between controlling her melee weapons versus firing with her pod, which is like this tiny little robot unit that shoots out bullets and sometimes other stuff. Sometimes she'll get into a ship and then it'll turn into more of a shooter, either a top-down shooter or a left-to-right, or sometimes even a 3D on-rails section. And it's really nice how seamlessly these seem to blend together. It's also really neat how you can press the right trigger to make 2B jump out of the way, and it has this very satisfying slow motion dodging, and usually if you press an attack button right after that, she'll come up with a pretty cool counter, such as if you try to do a melee attack right after countering, then she'll literally jump into the air and then slam herself down to create a shockwave. Or if you try to shoot your pod, then you'll shoot an extra powerful shot after a counter. And so it's really fun to incentivize yourself to continue getting better at dodging. Sometimes this game reminds me of Undertale, with how much the enemies will swarm you with bullets and you'll have to dodge them and shoot them out of the way. Overall, it starts out very strong. It has a lot of action and it just throws you into it without a whole lot of exposition and dialogue. However, one of the big problems I had with NieR was that it seemed to get worse as it went along, which is generally not a very good sign when you're playing a game. It started out fantastic, with a bombastic opening setting, lots of enemies to dodge, and a really cool boss battle. But then the exploration started coming in, and that is where the game went from enjoyable to downright painful. This has to have one of the worst map systems I have ever seen in a game. It was so confusing trying to figure out where I had to go, because a lot of times the side quest markers sort of blended in with the objective marker, and a lot of times the game would be very vague about what you had to do. Sometimes it wouldn't even show an objective marker. It would just have this circle on the screen, and you would be told, find something within the circle. Some of the earliest missions in the game involve fetch quests, where you have to gather a certain amount of materials and bring them back to the person who requested the side quest. The problem was that I didn't get the items right away because they were one of those, oh, the enemy will drop them, so just defeat the enemies. But then the enemies disappeared, and I was looking around frantically like, oh my gosh, have I missed a spot? Only to find out that what I had to do was I had to restart the game, only to turn it back on so that the enemies would respawn and hopefully drop the materials that I needed. Thankfully, the fetch quests were pretty few and far between, although there was this one endgame quest that involved using a scanner that was kind of annoying. Now, you could argue that that was just one isolated example, but the more I played through NieR, the more I started to notice that there were a ton of little things that added up to me overall having much more negativity than positivity. Hopefully I can list all of them, because my gosh, my internal monologue just would not shut up about complaining about this game. A lot of times the controls when the game would switch to a side-scrolling perspective were really finicky, like you'd try to climb up a ladder, but 2B just would not detect where the ladder was. I eventually figured out that if you press the dodge button, it'll automatically get 2B into a run cycle, but sometimes it wouldn't turn off if I didn't get into an attack. Then there were times when the enemies would be blending in with 2B and her companion, and then I wouldn't be able to see properly, and I wouldn't be able to dodge properly as a result. There was one level that had one-hit KO machines. It felt like, at times, the game just did not know how to provide a cohesive experience that blended well. When it stuck to the top-down shooters and the melee attacks, that's when it was mostly pretty fun. But even that had its problems, as I found that the enemy variety was really lacking. You face the same enemies throughout the game with hardly any variations except for the boss battles. I was actually shocked when I was capturing this footage and I was facing against waves of supposedly easy enemies, but their attack patterns were hardly any different than what I encountered later in the game, and they still looked the same. The graphics also are pretty hit or miss. This is a pretty gorgeous game by Switch standards, but it also feels like it was a byproduct of Nintendo 64 and GameCube level design. And what I mean by that is that, one, a lot of the colors were like brown and tingy, and you could say that's the point, because it's a game all about machines and, you know, a semi-apocalyptic world, but there's really not a whole lot of other colors besides green grass in one area of the game. Well, maybe two if you count the forest. But overall, it doesn't excuse the fact that there's not a whole lot of color variety, not to mention that 2B and her companion 9S are both dressed in black and white, so it's not a very colorful, pleasant game to look at. And of course this is on the Switch, so not all the textures are going to be super high resolution. A lot of times there are invisible walls where there clearly should be an opening, and times where it's like, I know I should be able to jump to here, but the game just does not want me to proceed. And so it felt like a lot of my freedom was taken away from me in a game that would otherwise be very fun to explore and move around in. It felt restricted, as though this were made on weaker hardware that excused itself by having a lot of action. The game also refuses to let you autosave, and even goes above and beyond, telling you over and over again that you can't, so you have to find dedicated vending machines or wait until the top of the screen says saving is possible. There's also this persistent message that keeps saying connecting to the network, and I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be an in-game logic thing, where you're like connecting to the network of machines, or if it was connecting to the internet. And overall, I couldn't figure out what it meant in the grand scheme of things. Speaking about what things meant, this game has multiple endings. And I was told after I got one of the endings that I should play the game multiple times to see everything NieR had to offer. At that point, I was so burnt out because I had run out of healing items, and the place where I got healing items had been destroyed time before, so I was like, where am I supposed to get them now? Am I just supposed to just wander around and grind for them? So eventually, because I was playing on the easiest difficulty, I had to switch to auto-firing, but then the main character got injured and the dodge button stopped working, and the auto-maneuvering stopped getting her to move out of the way, and the game forced her to be walking really slowly. Supposedly, it's supposed to be easy mode, but it felt like all of a sudden it was on hard mode. Now you could argue, Paul, you're just not very good at the game, and yeah, that's true. Like, a lot of this footage, you're gonna see me struggling and getting hit by basic enemies, probably because I don't play action games too much. So getting back to the endings, after I beat the first ending, and was thoroughly miserable, I thought, okay, well, maybe it's one of those games where you're supposed to get all the endings and then realize, oh, there's some grand narrative purpose. Well, for starters, I didn't enjoy the narrative very much to begin with. It felt like this very basic, hey, let's defeat these evil robots that are going haywire, and oh, maybe robots have feelings type of generic story. But then I looked up how many endings there were, and there's 26, and I was like, no way, not gonna happen. I beat this game, I got the credits, that's good enough for me. Now you might be saying, no wait a minute, Paul, you play games like Zero Escape that has multiple endings. Why is that game getting a pass and this game isn't? It's because Zero Escape is inherently more enjoyable and designed around replayability. This game, on the other hand, I kept having less fun the more I went along. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. I really liked the music in this game. It's semi-orchestral, but also has a lot of, like, sort of synthetic and a lot of chanting. And one song in particular has a lot of very great bass and baritone chanting that made the action seem way more epic than it should have been. And I also think that once the Rhythm Final Bar line comes out, I will probably have a blast purchasing the NieR song pack and playing a rhythm game to some of these tunes. Some of them repeated quite a lot, but overall, it was a very pleasant experience on the ears. The voice acting was really great when there was voice acting. It did seem like there were long stretches of time where nothing happened, and then there would be other times when the objective wouldn't show up right away, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? Only to find out that I had to wander to a specific area to get the commanding unit to send in a transmission to say, okay, now I am sending you the next objective. Like, why did you have to wait to send me the transmission? Why do you have to put artificial limits on my progression? Now, you could argue, well, Paul, you're supposed to take notes. You're not supposed to feel like you're floundering around, because if you paid attention, then you would know what you were doing. But when the environments start looking really samey and you begin to think that everything looks kind of the same after a while, and you're also not told that you have limited information, then it makes it frustrating, because the player should be given the knowledge of what they need to complete the game beforehand. I feel really bad that I've been bashing this game so much, because I'm sure if I played it more, or if I was more of a fan of action games, I would probably say that this was a masterpiece. But I also think that fans of action games are going to look past the nitty-gritty issues and just say, well, I'm having so much fun while dodging enemies that I can overlook its flaws and the story is good. But I didn't really find myself liking the characters. I did not get emotionally invested in anything. I also found that whenever the characters were complaining, I was complaining, and that's also generally not a good sign. Like, there was one part where one of the bosses appeared again, and the character was like, oh no, not this guy again, and I was like, my sentiments exactly. I'm pretty sure that's bad game design right there. And I found myself just wishing that the internet didn't exist while I was playing this, because it's pretty much automatically going to set this review up for failure. It's going to make it so that anyone who disagrees with my opinion is going to automatically dislike, even if the video editing was good and the footage was good. And I don't know, I just think that in an era where the collective opinion is supposedly the only right one, it makes it harder for people who disagree with the collective opinion to feel like their voices are validated. I would say that most people who like action games and who are maybe a little bit more intuitive than I am would probably like NieR Automata. As far as differences in the Switch version, there's just a couple of extra costumes, so you're not really getting a whole changed experience or remake. And the voice acting and music are really good. But it also has a really confusing map system that doesn't do a very good job of conveying depth or where you have to go. And there's a lot of really annoying fetch quests at the beginning that might not trigger properly until you reset the game. A lack of autosaving, sometimes very frustrating mission objectives that aren't explained properly. And due to the lack of autosaving, sometimes you'll have to repeat really annoying sections of the game. So with that, thank you very much for putting up with my complaining. I still want to thank Matthew Rakowski for sending the game, as the times that I actually did have fun were fun, and I don't regret playing it. I just regret that I couldn't go along with the collective opinion. Also, thanks to him and my other patrons, Splatcat and Sploonghost, for supporting me financially. I can't overstate enough how much you guys are helping me out during this time. And until the next time, I hope you have a wonderful day, and remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!